The Saturday afternoon air in 1880s New Jersey was often thick with the smell of black powder and the sharp, rhythmic crack of 12-gauge shotguns. To the men gathered at the Riverton Gun Club, this was the pinnacle of refined leisure. They were not frontiersmen or starving settlers. They were lawyers, merchants, and the rising scions of the American middle class. They wore tailored tweed and held their posture with the rigid discipline of a generation that believed moral character was forged through sport. This was the era of the live pigeon shoot, a practice that was as legal as a contract and as respectable as a church social. In the grand hierarchy of Victorian pastimes, it sat comfortably alongside horse racing and yachting, framed not as a display of carnage, but as a rigorous test of masculine nerves, hand-eye coordination, and the steady application of discipline. The mechanics of the sport were as precise as any modern athletic endeavor. A row of 5 small wooden boxes, known as traps, would be placed in a gentle arc on a manicured lawn. Inside each sat a live bird, usually a common blue rock pigeon, or, in more prestigious circles, a passenger pigeon. The marksman stood 30 yards back, his boots polished, his gaze fixed. Upon his command, the sharp, singular shout of "pull!" A boy standing behind the line would yank a cord, collapsing one of the boxes at random. The bird, suddenly exposed to the light and the noise, would take flight. The shooter had only a second or two to track the erratic silhouette against the sky and fire. The rules were ironclad and judged with a severity that would satisfy any modern referee. To score a point, the bird had to fall within a designated boundary, often a circle marked by a low wire fence. If the pigeon was hit, but managed to flutter even an inch outside that perimeter before touching the ground, the shot was recorded as a miss. It was a game of percentages in cold efficiency. There was no pretense of hunting for food. The birds were rarely used for anything other than the tally. This was an exercise in status. Winning a purse, which could reach as high as $1,000, a small fortune at the time, was less about the money than the social validation it provided. It proved that the participant possessed the calm, decisive nature required to succeed in the cutthroat world of American industry. Participants in these events did not view themselves as cruel, nor did the crowds of spectators who gathered to watch the spectacles at places like Madison Square Garden. Cruelty, in the late 19th century mind, was something performed by the uneducated or the drunken. It was a lack of control. Live pigeon shooting, by contrast, was an exhibition of total control. The bird was not an object of empathy. It was a resource, a biological variable designed to test a man's mastery over his environment. At the time, the natural world was still largely viewed as a vast, inexhaustible storehouse of tools. To shoot a bird for sport was no more immoral than burning coal for heat. The Victorian moral compass stopped at the border of human suffering. So long as the men were behaving like gentlemen, honoring their bets, maintaining their equipment, and adhering to the rules, the internal state of the pigeon was irrelevant to the social order. However, the sport contained the seeds of its own obsolescence. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, the private nature of the gun club began to collide with the rise of modern media. What was once a secluded weekend activity for the elite was increasingly documented in the penny press and early photography. The transition was not a sudden awakening of the soul, but a shift in visibility. When the public could see the crates of thousands of birds being shipped into cities, and when the images of the gathering boys picking up the fallen moved from the sports page to the front page, the optics changed. The rise of early animal welfare organizations, such as the SPCA, provided a vocabulary for a discomfort that had been quietly brewing. The sport didn't become more violent. The audience simply lost the ability to ignore the cost of the entertainment. By the early 1900s, state after state began to pass bans on the use of live animals in competitive shooting. Yet, the desire to shoot something out of the air didn't evaporate. It was simply sanitized. The live pigeon was replaced by the clay pigeon, a disc of pitch and limestone that mimicked the flight path of a bird without the inconvenient reality of blood. The behavior continued, the discipline remained, and the clubs stayed open. The only thing that changed was that the victim became inanimate, and therefore the sport became socially invisible. If we look back at the men of the Riverton Gun Club with a sense of moral superiority, we risk missing the fundamental lesson of their era. We assume that we have evolved beyond the need for such visceral, costly entertainments. We believe that our hobbies are cleaner, more intellectual, and devoid of victims. But if we peel back the polished screen of the modern American weekend, a direct and unsettling comparison emerges. The Victorian marksman stood before a wooden trap box. The modern middle-class American sits before a digital one. Today, the competitive test of nerves and reflexes has moved from the shotgun range to the smartphone. Our hobbies are built on the architecture of the variable reward schedule, the same psychological engine that powered the 5-trap Pigeon arc. When we open an app, we are waiting for the box to drop. We are waiting for the notification, the like, the surge of engagement, or the next video in an infinite scroll. This is the gamification of the human psyche, a sophisticated system designed to elicit an instinctive, split-second reaction. We call it content consumption, but the mechanics are remarkably similar to the sport of the 1880s. It is an organized, judged, and rewarded exercise in focus and reflex. The Victorian sport consumed the life of a bird. Our modern digital sports consume the life of the user. In the past, the harm was visible and immediate, a puff of feathers in a fallen creature. Today, the harm is invisible and delayed. We do not lose a bird. We lose our attention, our focus, and our financial margin. The loot box in a mobile game or the algorithmic feed of a social media platform is a modern trap box, and the pull is the swipe of a thumb. The industry that surrounds our digital entertainments is far larger and more efficient than the 19th century pigeon trade, but its goal is the same: to turn a biological instinct into a quantifiable, profitable score. Consider the modern middle-class hobby of the infinite scroll. A person can spend hours tracking a stream of digital stimuli, their brain firing in the same rapid response patterns as a shooter at the mark. There is a sense of skill involved, navigating the discourse, curating the feed, maintaining the streak. We frame these activities as leisure and relaxation, just as the Riverton men frame their shooting as discipline and sport. We do not see ourselves as victims of these platforms, just as the Victorians did not see themselves as cruel. We are simply participating in the accepted social order of our time. The comparison becomes most acute when we look at the victim. In 1885, a man would say, "It's just a bird." He meant that the creature had no intrinsic value beyond its role in the game. He used the word just to create a moral distance between his pleasure and the cost of that pleasure. Today, when confronted with the reality of how much time, mental health, and cognitive autonomy we surrender to our devices, we say, "It's just an app." We use the same word to perform the same function. We imply that because the interaction is digital, because it is bloodless and weightless, it is without consequence. But history suggests that the word just is often the most dangerous word in our vocabulary. It is the linguistic tool we use to bridge the gap between our behavior and our conscience. The live pigeon shoot was not banned because people suddenly developed a profound, universal empathy for pigeons. It was banned because the sight of the sport became incompatible with the image of a civilized society. The cost became too visible to be ignored. The legal risk outweighed the social reward. We are currently living in the private club phase of digital consumption. Our habits are considered normal, respectable, and even necessary for participation in modern life. We admire the skill of those who can navigate the digital landscape with high efficiency. We reward the winners of the attention economy with status and influence. We treat the erosion of our private thoughts and our quiet hours as a necessary resource for the progress of the industry, much like the Victorian marksman viewed the pigeon. Eventually, the audience for our current behavior will change. Future generations may look back at the attention markets of the early 21st century with the same reflective irony we reserve for the live pigeon shoots of the 19th. They will see the data centers, the engagement algorithms, and the engagement boys of the tech industry as a bizarre and costly infrastructure built to satisfy a primitive urge for stimulus. They will wonder why we were so willing to crate up our hours and ship them off to be consumed by an arc of 5 digital traps. History does not move in a straight line toward kindness. It moves toward the management of optics. We clean up our sports when the mess begins to stain our self-image. We replace the bird with clay because we wanted the thrill without the feathers on our lapels. We are already looking for ways to sanitize our digital addictions. Digital detoxes, focus modes, and screen time trackers, seeking a way to keep the swipe without the soul weariness that follows. We want the target, but we are increasingly uncomfortable with the realization that, in the modern game, we are both the marksman and the bird. The men of 1880 were not monsters. They were simply men of their time, operating within the boundaries of what was visible and what was ignored. They sat on their clubhouse porches, cleaned their guns, and looked out over the fields with a sense of accomplishment. They believed they were practicing the discipline of the future. We sit in our coffee shops, scroll through our feeds, and feel the same sense of participation in a grand, sophisticated system. We believe we are the masters of our tools. The quiet, unsettling truth is that every era has its pigeons. Every society finds a way to justify the consumption of something precious for the sake of a Saturday afternoon's entertainment. We have not eliminated the cost. We have only made it harder to see. We have moved the blood off the lawn and into the circuitry. In the 19th century, when a critic pointed to the crates of birds, the gentleman responded with a shrug and a simple justification. It's just a bird. Today, when we are confronted with the hollowed-out focus of our children or the flattened margins of our own inner lives, we offer the same shrug and the same justification. It's just an app. We should perhaps be more cautious. History teaches us that whenever we use that word to describe our entertainment, we are usually hiding the victim in plain sight. Would you like me to explore another historical sport that transitioned into a modern digital equivalent, perhaps focusing on the evolution of gambling mechanics from physical slot machines to gacha mechanics in mobile gaming?